So here we are for the lecture on philosophy, the introductory lecture on philosophy and conspiracy theories. We can call it "Connect the Philosophy of Connecting the Dots" for fun. There, I'm sure everyone finds that just hilarious. Uh, let's get started with a couple of discussion questions. So for each of these, just think about, how you would answer these at the outset here. First, what's an example of a theory generally considered a conspiracy theory, or that you consider a conspiracy theory? Uh, so just there are many things you might point to here, but just give us an example of a theory that's generally considered a conspiracy theory. Then, when you think of a conspiracy theory, how do you think of it specifically? What image comes to mind when you think of a conspiracy theorist, and what kinds of things make a theory a conspiracy theory? What kind of features does the theory have to have in order for it to qualify as a conspiracy theory? And then lastly, when others in everyday life or you yourself use the term conspiracy theory, how is that being used? What do you mean exactly by that? As best you can, at least at this point initially, again, try to define that precisely. And does it include a dismissive use, or is it used more neutrally? In other words, when you talk about conspiracy theories, are you describing the theory, or are you also maybe describing it and evaluating the theory in the definition itself? So those would be some things that we can use to get started thinking about the philosophy of conspiracy theory. So just take a minute and answer each of those for yourself. So when I asked you what image comes to mind when you think of a conspiracy theorist, it may have been something, or it's maybe even likely that it was something like this fella here. We often, in popular media and popular opinion, have this idea of a conspiracy theorist as a paranoid, irrational, unhinged, and maybe even a mentally unwell, crazy person, right? Who believes these things that are wild and fantastic. And the idea being, that belief in conspiracy theories as such is, deeply irrational and flawed. Of course, there are people in our world who espouse conspiracy theories. So, for example, here's on the left-hand side here, we have David Icke, who's a British well-known conspiracy theorist. And on the right, we have American conspiracy theorist Alex Jones, who you may be familiar with. If you're not familiar with Icke, Jones was recently, convicted of... I forget exactly what he was convicted of. I'd have to go back and double check. But he's basically being bankrupted by a court decision by parents of Sandy Hook children who sued him. So, these are actual... There are people in our world who believe these sorts of things and who are often disparaged as, unhinged and irrational folks. And then, of course, it has to be kind of clear to all of us that conspiracy theories are a major topic for us. They do influence people to do things. So there are people who believe that, Donald Trump is a Russian asset. There are people who believe that 9/11 was an inside job that was done by the Bush administration or by other elements in the government at the time. There's the famous JFK shooting conspiracy, who assassinated him. And the Pizzagate is another recent conspiracy theory. So this gentleman drove... he believed the conspiracy, or at least believed it enough to want to go check it out and see whether there was an actual basement where people were doing ritualistic, baby murder at the bottom of this, in the basement of this pizza shop. Turns out there's no basement in that pizza shop, right? And then, of course, we all have to worry about whether Taylor Swift is a Pentagon psyop. Who's trying to influence politics. There are several, of course, issues that pop up that are philosophical issues that arise because of conspiracy theories. And they include things like, how are we going to properly define a conspiracy theory? By this point in the semester, you've probably already seen philosophers worried about how to define things precisely, well, more precisely than our dictionary or lexical definitions define them. And there are often conceptual debates over how to define things precisely. We need to worry about whether it's always irrational or epistemically vicious to believe a conspiracy theory, or it might in some cases be the reasonable thing to believe. We need to worry about possible moral and political values related to conspiracy theories and whether they're harmful or not, or are they just kind of, in forms of entertainment, right? We can worry about whether there's a relationship between conspiracy theories and propaganda and echo chambers, right? Also, some ideas we've likely covered this semester already. And a couple of key distinctions to keep in mind as you're going through the material on philosophy of conspiracy theories. The first is, and it does have to do with how we define conspiracy theories and whether or not they're irrational or not, and it's this debate between the generalists and the particularists. The generalists think that there's something, generally, as the label implies pretty strongly there, incorrect and deeply flawed about conspiracy theories. In the particularist, they're more sympathetic and think that we have to take each conspiracy theory on its own merits before we can evaluate it. And again, kind of dovetailing with that notion is the difference between the minimalist definition of a conspiracy theory and the more propaganda style definition of a conspiracy theory. Either where conspiracy theories are themselves forms of propaganda, or a definition of conspiracy theory that smuggles in, maybe implicitly or maybe more overtly, an evaluation of conspiracy theories as such. So we need to worry about those sorts of issues from a philosophical standpoint. Picking up on some of that often involve abductive reasoning or other forms of inductive reasoning. We've encountered this type of reasoning earlier in the semester in the logic section, but just as a quick refresher, it's a non-deductive, abductive reasoning or argumentation is a non-deductive or inductive type of argument that tries to establish a theory is likely to be the case if it's the best explanation of some phenomenon, also known as reasoning to the best explanation. And so we're worried about, which of the explanations that present itself or that are viable explanations, which of them is the best explanation, which does the best job of explaining the phenomena and is therefore most likely to be true. So there's an initial difficulty in evaluating these sorts of things because there's usually more than one explanation or theory that we have to wade through. At the very least, these theories need to be internally consistent as well as cohere with well-established facts and other theories. And then we might also worry about Occam's razor here. All things being equal, the most elegant or simplest explanation is typically the correct argument or the correct view. What simplest or elegant here means the one with the fewest assumptions. So sometimes it's put lex parsimony in Latin, which means basically don't multiply assumptions beyond necessity. So if one theory has one assumption in it and another theory has 10, the one that has 10 has 9 more ways to go wrong than the one that only has one assumption. So the elegant one is to be preferred, all things being equal. And then we've got a basic template for this sort of reasoning. So we've got some phenomena, some event, right, that occurs. The Twin Towers fall down, or the universe is expanding at a given rate. All the bodies in space are moving away from each other at a given rate. If hypothesis H were true, then H would provide the best explanation of that. Thus, it's likely that that theory is true. And then here's just an example, a really kind of brief example of a little bit of abductive reasoning in a different area of philosophy, the philosophy of mind, with the mind-body problem, where Jeffrey Olin argues for a materialistic view of the world, or excuse me, not just of the world, but of the human person, versus dualistic views of the person, where there's this problem of how a non-physical mind relates to the physical body. Well, he proposes reductive materialism as a more elegant explanation of the correspondence that we observe between mental states and brain states compared to the dualistic views. So with that idea and that little bit of background in mind, let's turn to the conventional wisdom on conspiracy theories. And again, think of your own answers to those questions that I posed at the outset. Here we have Karl Popper, a passage from his influential work, Conjectures and Refutations. Popper was a influential philosopher of science, said that what marks out of scientific theory is its falsifiability. And in his Conjectures and Refutations, he gives basically an academic voice to what we'll call the conventional wisdom. Namely, the conspiracy theory of society is a typical result of the secularization of a religious superstition. The belief in the Homeric gods whose conspiracies explain the history of the Trojan War is gone, and in their place are a powerful group of men, sinister pressure groups whose wickedness is responsible for all the evils we suffer from, such as the learned elders of Zion, the monopolist or the capitalist or the imperialist, right? Kind of referring to global elite conspiracy theories there. So Karl Popper there kind of gives us that conventional wisdom. And, again, a lot of conspiracy theories aren't taken very seriously in intellectual circles for this sort of reason. It's viewed just as religious superstition, or something like, as he says, the secularization of religious superstition. So it's superstition. We don't need to take it serious. Right. And then one of the things we'll do in this unit is worry about whether that popular opinion or conventional wisdom about conspiracy theories is correct or not. So again, many people, including philosophers like Popper, seem to hold the view that something's inherently flawed or irrational, ridiculous, or crazy, so forth, about all conspiracy theories and belief in any conspiracy theory. And so one of our basic questions here will be whether that conventional wisdom or popular wisdom about conspiracy theories is correct. Thinking about the argument forms that we have already learned, we can kind of state the conventional wisdom in a basic argument form. So let's just call this the conventional wisdom argument. And I've formulated it here as just a simple little one-stage modus ponens argument. So the first premise is, if a theory qualifies as a conspiracy theory, then it is irrational, implausible, or otherwise unworthy of consideration in reasoned debate about events. Theory X, pick your favorite theory that might be a conspiracy theory, qualifies as that kind of theory. Thus, that theory is irrational, implausible, or otherwise unworthy of consideration in reasoned debate about events. So as we go through the readings, as you go through the readings and other assigned content for this unit in the class, pay special attention to whether the authors are sympathetic with or criticize the popular view or conventional wisdom about conspiracy theories. The popular view, or what we're going to call the conventional wisdom view, that fits more with the generalist view of conspiracy theories. And so really we're going to test that generalist view that kind of seems built into conventional wisdom or popular opinion about conspiracy theories. So again, keep this argument in mind, and when you're going through the different readings, think about whether those authors are endorsing something like this argument, or whether they are criticizing something along the lines inside this argument. And of course, key issues to pay attention to are how they define conspiracy theories and how they do so in a more precise way, and how that influences, and how that plays the role of a reason for or against the conventional wisdom regard to conspiracy theories. And so with that, we kind of conclude our little introduction to this topic here, and you can get started reading some of the particular articles that have been assigned in this unit. So we'll see you next time, and have fun reading about conspiracy theories. Okay, now that we've talked a little bit about popular opinion or conventional wisdom about conspiracy theories, let's take a look at a couple of different articles or some information from some various articles that is relevant to questioning popular opinion about conspiracy theories. So first, let's take a look at this article by Dentith. Depends on what I assign this semester. I may have signed this one, or I often the next one I'm going to talk about is from Pigden. So here, these are both two philosophy professors that challenge the popular opinion or our usual thinking, what they take to be our usual thinking about conspiracy theories. And so Dentith's article, From Shape-Shifting Alien Lizards to the Dodgy Dossier, makes several key points that you ought to pay attention to. So first, conspiracy theories and the people that believe them are inherently suspect according to popular opinion or, again, conventional wisdom. They're irrational, paranoid, but then he asks in that article, does popular opinion, does it really survive critical scrutiny, right? So he's identified a popular belief and then is going to subject it to scrutiny here. Very common thing for philosophers to do, and here we're just doing that in regard to a conspiracy theory. You might remember earlier on in the semester when I first introduced philosophy in the general introduction, I probably gave a quote from Epictetus that talked about recognizing the conflict among the opinions of men, a search for the origin of that conflict, and then an investigation to see whether what opinion is rightly held. Well, here we have Dentith, another philosopher, picking up a conflict of opinions between people, popular opinion, and others who might disagree with that, and then subjecting it to critical scrutiny here. And so one of the first things he does after his introduction is talk about how to define conspiracy theories. Important part of his essay. He mentions two things in particular. First, the idea that conspiracy theories are inherently suspicious, and that being a conspiracy theorist necessarily means you're a paranoid personality type. So he talks about both of those issues in regard to defining a conspiracy theory. So when you're reading through this article, be sure and pay special attention to those 2 points in conjunction with how he defines a conspiracy theory. He's going to be more on the minimalist definition side. So then he also discusses this idea that if we're historically and politically literate, then actually we're all conspiracy theorists of some kind. He makes this distinction between conspiracism and conspiracists on the one hand, which is like the irrational belief in conspiracy theories or irrational conspiracy theories, versus more plausible conspiracy theories. And so he wants to challenge this notion that, the assumption of the popular opinion is that all conspiracy theories are conspiracists or forms of conspiracism, namely forms of irrational belief. So he points out that given his definition, what he thinks is the correct definition of a conspiracy theory, that we're all conspiracy theorists of some kind or another, and likely, in other words, we likely believe some conspiracy theories based on knowledge that we have about historical and political events. So this should be not politically literate and historically literate, not literature there. I need to fix that in the slide. And so he points out that what we ought to do is to judge each theory, even something called a conspiracy theory, on the evidence for that theory. In other words, don't prejudge theories. Then, thinking about his article, I kind of constructed a little argument out of it. So I'm not totally settled on this version of it, but I think this is basically what he's getting at here. So I have a big constructive dilemma. I call it the conspiracy dilemma argument here for reference. So either you're not historically or politically literate, or you are historically and politically literate. If you're not historically and politically literate, then there's no principled reason to dismiss conspiracy theories or conspiracists. If you are historically and politically literate, then you probably believe some conspiracy theory and are a conspiracy theorist of some kind. Thus, or therefore, either way, there's no principled reason to dismiss conspiracy theories and theorists out of hand, or you're a conspiracy theorist of some kind. So we get kind of, again, a big constructive dilemma argument out of Dentith's article there. Now let's take a look at another article. So again, another article that you might have been assigned this semester is from Pigden. Pigden is a philosopher who really kind of, started off the current wave of interest in conspiracy theories amongst philosophers by challenging Popper's notion of them. So he's got an article, Popper Revisited, where he examines Popper's basic argument against conspiracy theorists. And he draws many of the same themes that are in that article he talks about in his Everyone's a Conspiracy Theorist article that, again, that you may have been assigned for this semester. So again, he starts off talking about conventional wisdom, about conspiracy theories, and then he's going to challenge again. So like Dentith, he challenges conventional wisdom. He does so by, again, thinking about the definition and clarifying the definition of a conspiracy theory. He points out that people conspire all the time, that these are common, not rare events, that some conspiracies turn out to be true. So, for example, attempted plot to assassinate Hitler, that was a conspiracy, and it turned out to be true. Dentith also mentioned Pigden in his article and mentioned that point there as well. And so prematurely, another big point that he makes is prematurely dismissing a theory simply because the media or others label it a conspiracy theory kind of functions rhetorically as a silencing move that shuts down investigation of that theory. He thinks that that's particularly dangerous, so pay attention to why he thinks that as well. And then lastly, of course, pay attention to why he thinks that everyone's a conspiracy theorist. So again, a common kind of theme that we see between Dentith and Pigden, who are challenging contemporary popular opinion about conspiracy theories. So if you remember, we had this conventional wisdom argument. So if a theory counts as a conspiracy theory, then it's by definition or as such irrational, implausible, or otherwise unworthy of consideration and reasoned debate about events. Theory X, plug in whatever theory you think is a conspiracy theory there. Thus, that theory is by definition irrational, implausible, unworthy of serious consideration and reasoned debate about events, or unworthy of being taken seriously as an explanation. So think about how Dentith and Pigden would challenge this argument. In particular, which of the key premises, or maybe both of them, would they challenge? And in order to think about that argument and how they might criticize that argument, we need to think about how this term or this phrase, conspiracy theory, is being used in this argument, right? So again, we've seen a couple of folks arguing over the definition of a conspiracy theory there. So that's going to be a relevant issue for examining that argument and determining whether it's sound or not. So again, think about how Dentith and or Pigden or the other readings that you may have been assigned in this section would challenge the conventional wisdom argument about conspiracy theories and the specific reasons that they give for doing so and the specific premises that they would challenge. So obviously 3 is a conclusion, so it's either going to be 1, 2, or both 1 and 2. And then again, think about what reasons Pigden or Dentith or again some other author might give for either endorsing or criticizing this argument. And think again about the specifics of that criticism. Picking up on some of that, we can shift gears a little bit and look at some of the problems with conspiracy theories. So we've seen two philosophy professors challenging the conventional wisdom and popular opinion about conspiracy theories. Let's look at some others now. So some problems with conspiracy theories. We've just mentioned how to define a conspiracy theory is an important part of figuring out whether someone's endorsing or criticizing our conventional wisdom argument. Let's take a look at Kassam. Kassam is another philosophy professor. He's a British guy. And he wrote a little book that came out in 2019 called Conspiracy Theories. It's a pretty short book, actually, so it's a pretty easy read. It's only about 100 and maybe 25 pages, and it's not a large book physically at all, so they're kind of small pages. And in that book, he provides an alternative definition of a conspiracy theory to what we've been looking at so far. So he says, conspiracy theory in the ordinary sense of the term refers not simply to any generic conspiracy theory, like that minimalist definition that Pigden and Dentith have been working with and arguing for, but rather an extraordinary theory that involves more than just the 3 conditions of the minimalist definition. Conspiracy theories are, first and foremost, forms of political propaganda. So again, he's working with a very different notion of conspiracy theory than in his text, not his textbook, in his little book here. He defines, or he distinguishes between conspiracy theory with an uppercase C and an uppercase T. In other words, capital C and capital T conspiracy theories, with lowercase conspiracy theories that are that minimalist definition. And so you can sit and think about, which of these definitions really captures more of what's going on in our public discussion about these sorts of theories. And he lists off several key elements or several features that political propaganda definitions of this phenomenon of conspiracy theories have. So first, he mentions that they're speculative. They're based typically on conjecture rather than any kind of solid evidence. All of those dots that make up the conspiracy theory, that connects all those dots, are they all true? Did they all happen the way that the theory or the conspiracy narrative says that they happened? Second, these theories are contrarian. They reject not only the official or mainstream stories that we hear in our standard media outlets, but they also they're contrary to the appearances and more obvious explanations that are given of these sorts of events. So that's what he means by contrarian here. They're also esoteric. They emphasize less obvious explanations over those more obvious ones. So once we rule out the mainstream, more obvious explanations, we're left with esoteric and less obvious explanations as well. And you might note that in many conspiracy theories, they kind of rely on understanding of different coded symbols and code words and things like that are really symbolic of their other meanings, right? So again, less obvious meanings of these signs that are supposed to point towards conspiracy theories. So again, prioritizing less obvious over more obvious explanations. And then they're amateurish. Many of these theories arise not from, science departments and universities or from think tanks, but rather from amateurs, on the dark corners of the internet. So where do these things come from, and does their origins really matter or not? And one thing that Kassam points out here is that while many proponents of conspiracy theories want their theories to be taken seriously and will claim that they're being unfairly discriminated against by mainstream intellectuals, they often disregard the methods of inquiry and the norms of inquiry that are part and parcel of doing professional science or doing professional history or sociology or these other sorts of things, right? So again, they're typically not experts in the relevant fields. Sometimes they may even trade on their expertise in another field, right? To kind of make it look like, they're a smart person, therefore you should take them seriously about this other thing, the conspiracy theory. There's this issue of competency transfer there. And then these conspiracy theories are often pre-modern, or they seem like they're part of a pre-modern worldview in which it would be possible for small groups of people who are in power to control more complex events because our world was smaller, the populations are smaller, and people are living in smaller cities, and they're not connected the way we are. So these conspiracy theories often have kind of a pre-modern worldview that goes along with them. Might be more plausible to think that the king and his friends, the aristocrats, might be able to control events in a certain place, but much more difficult for that to happen in a world that's so interconnected like ours is now, in which it's much harder for small groups of people to get away with almost anything, right? And then late in the book, Kassam adds this last feature. And so this should remind us of echo chambers a little bit. Self-sealing. He says that conspiracy theories are self-sealing. So if you've ever debated a conspiracy theorist, you've probably come across people who say things like, they call you a sheeple or they call you brainwashed and you're duped by the elites if you don't buy their theory, right? So you're either sympathetic with the conspiracy theory or you're brainwashed, right? You're duped, you're a pawn of the people perpetuating this conspiracy theory. And so, according to Kassam, conspiracy theories with these features are unlikely, improbable by design, even if some conspiracy theories, lowercase c and t there, turn out to be true. So Kassam gives a very different definition of a conspiracy theory than just those three criteria: the secrecy criteria, the goal criteria, and the conspirator criteria of that minimalist definition that was being used by both Pigden and Dentith there. So picking up on that last feature, self-sealing, the self-sealing feature of conspiracy theories. Again, keep in mind epistemic bubbles, echo chambers, epistemic vice, and conspiracy theories. So it's likely that I may have had you read or listen to a podcast by Wynne on his essay, Epistemic Bubbles and Echo Chambers. And in that essay, he mentions not only cult indoctrination, but also echo chambers. And he says that conspiracy theories function here in a fascinating inversion of what he calls corroborative bootstrapping. And in corroborative bootstrapping, the mistake is to treat problematically dependently selected insiders, in-group, out-group, so on the inside, as if they were independent, and thus overweight their testimony. When an echo chamber uses a conspiracy theory in this matter, they're attributing a problematic form of non-independence to outsiders who are actually independent, and thereby underweighting outside testimony. So again, that idea that if you're not sympathetic with the conspiracy worldview, you're part of the problem. You've been duped by the propaganda, right? So if that's the case, you're an outsider and we don't take you seriously. There's a way in which the poisoning the well fallacy fits in there as well. So he says an echo chamber here works by discrediting the apparent independence of, say, different climate change scientists by claiming that all their various testimonies are problematically derived from a single source. Incidentally, this is Wynne saying here, I'm not claiming here that conspiracy theories are always or necessarily incorrect or the product of epistemic vice. Remember, epistemic vices or intellectual vices are personal character traits that undermine our capacities to get knowledge, right? So things like gullibility, stupidity, lack of intellectual curiosity, a lack of intellectual rigor, these would be things that are intellectual or epistemic vices. And so he says, continuing here, as others have argued, believing in conspiracy theories isn't bad per se, because some conspiracy theories are true. But then he goes on, and I want to emphasize this part. But the fact that conspiracy theories can function to reinforce the boundaries of echo chambers, though they do not necessarily do so, might explain part of conspiracy theories' bad rap. Because of their effectiveness in setting up disagreement reinforcement mechanisms, conspiracy theories are often conscripted as a powerful tool in the bad epistemic behavior of certain groups. So again, both epistemic vice and echo chambers are relevant to our discussion of conspiracy theories here. Notice that one of the things that Wynne is pointing out here is that, maybe there's something to the conventional or popular opinion about conspiracy theories, right? Maybe the fact that conspiracy theories function to reinforce boundaries of echo chambers is kind of intuitively recognized by people who have given rise to this popular or conventional wisdom about conspiracy theories. And then moving on here, I may have assigned here Shay's The Wrong Thinking in Conspiracy Theories for you to read. So what I'll do is assign, a pro and a con piece, even though things are typically a little bit more complicated than that in philosophy. We often oversimplify things in an intro class, and so often these debates, I'll just boil them down to two basic positions, so there's a clear contradiction between them, and then we try and resolve that contradiction or show one of those positions to be a little bit better off than the other for some particular consideration. And so Kassam is criticizing conspiracy theories and endorsing something closer to the conventional wisdom about it. He's more of a generalist. Shea is also more of a generalist in this debate. And the title of his article is The Wrong Thinking in Conspiracy Theories. And once again, he starts off by defining conspiracy theory. And when you're reading this article, what's important to note is that he doesn't really draw on the propaganda definition of conspiracy theories. He has something closer in mind to the minimalist definition, but he still goes on to claim that those conspiracy theories that have that form all involve failures of inductive logic or inductive reasoning that contain inductive fallacies, basically. So he talks about how to define a conspiracy theory, the potential harms of conspiracy theory. So I mentioned this kind of at the outset, and we haven't really talked about it again much here. But, if you happen to believe that the vaccine is going to put a nanobot in you that tracks your every movement, and secretly sends information about your body to some nefarious group, you're probably not going to take the vaccine. And the potential harm is if the disease turns out to be real and the vaccine turns out to work against it, you might end up on the unhealthy side of that gamble. So he talks again about the origins of conspiracy theories and how they come from typically non-experts. So again, amateurish popping back up there again. He says that, again, that they involve theories, failures of inductive reasoning. And so really important things to pay attention to in this article include the lessons that he draws from David Hume's On Miracles, where he talks about testimony. So I mentioned before probably that, often in a philosophy class, you might cover the philosophy of religion, where one of the main debates is whether religious belief is rational. And so that depends on how we define religious belief or religious faith, and, whether it's by definition irrational or non-rational or rational or possibly rational. And we often believe these things based on testimony. Well, we get many of our conspiratorial beliefs from testimony as well. We get most of what we believe comes from testimony. And so Shea draws some lessons from Hume's analysis of when to believe a miracle occurred for believing in conspiracy theories as well. Then something much more recent than Hume, he mentions Thinking Fast and Slow, which is a book by some psychologists who talk about how intuitive heuristics often lead us astray when we're engaged in inductive reasoning. So Kahneman and Tversky's Thinking Fast and Slow talks again about intuitive heuristics and how those heuristics lead to problems with our assessment of probabilities. So, for example, we don't really have good data on how often things occur as a result of people working in secret with one another versus just, chance or statistical probabilities. So picking between the conspiracy theory and just the statistical chance of that event occurring on its own without a conspiracy behind it, we don't have the data to pick between those two things usually. So he ends up, talking about how belief in a conspiracy theory is kind of like a kind of wager. So be sure and pay attention to how he discusses how how deciding to believe a conspiracy theory is like kind of making a bet or a wager. There's another article that's kind of relevant here, just to give you a little bit more on how reasoning can go astray with regard to conspiracy theories. Johnson, in an article called How Fallacies Fuel Conspiracy Theories, lists several different cognitive biases and informal fallacies that seem to be involved in lots of conspiracy theories. And so he mentions motivated reasoning, mentions confirmation bias, so again, self-sealing popping up there, evidence denial. We will deny evidence that conflicts with our existing beliefs. We'll interpret New information is confirming our pre-existing beliefs. We'll make the availability error and prioritize information and evidence that's easily more accessible to us or that we happen to recall over other relevant information. We engage in subjective validation. So, something will be based on our personal reaction to it rather than the objective evidence for it. So again, that ties in with prospect theory that Shea talked about. Then he mentions the suppressed evidence fallacy, or what he calls the factoid fallacy in the article, and that's the informal fallacy that occurs when an argument leaves out or ignores evidence that shows the conclusion is incorrect or less likely to be true than just presenting all the points in favor of it, basically, right? Then he mentions the countless counterfeits fallacy, which is another informal fallacy occurring when a large amount of faulty evidence is said to imply the truth of a conclusion or the truth of a view. So sometimes, a conspiracy theory will just like pile on all sorts of evidence, and we're kind of overwhelmed by the amount of this evidence, but it tends to be faulty, right? All of our little dots that we're supposed to connect turn out to not have been the case or didn't happen the way the theory says so. But the sheer amount of us will lead us to fallaciously conclude that, well, all this evidence must mean that something's going on here. And then lastly, Johnson points out the mystery, therefore magic fallacy, which is just his phrase for an appeal to ignorance fallacy. That fallacy occurs when the absence of evidence is said to imply a conclusion. So usually it'll say, this fallacy will occur because someone says, well, X hasn't been disproven, so X is true, or X is true because it hasn't been disproven, right? So that fallacy can go either way there. And then just as more of a little fun way to end up, another article by Coppinger and Peter, How to Build a Conspiracy Theory. They basically give you some steps for kind of creating your own conspiracy theory here. But what they point out is that building a conspiracy theory involves, again, some inductive problems. So they note that if you want to build a conspiracy theory, first what you got to do is identify lots of unconnected pieces of information, data, evidence, so forth, that again seems unconnected. These are all the little dots, right? The philosophy of connecting the dots here. So we add up all the little dots, the data points of the events that make up and evidence that make up our conspiracy theory, or the points in which the theory is going to connect. Then we propose a theory that connects those dots, and that theory or that conspiracy narrative has to, entail that evidence that we pointed out in one. So those two, have to rely on each other. And then third, what we do when we're defending this theory is we emphasize the explanatory power of the theory, right? If the theory were true, it really would be the best explanation of all this data, while ignoring, minimizing, or obfuscating the low probabilities of the alleged information and the connections between all those dots. So if the theory were true, right, it would have the high probability of explaining all the data and the dots. After all, the theory has to entail that evidence, right? But the actual probability of the dots and the connections between them are low or otherwise cannot be confirmed. Remember, one of the things we pointed out at the outset here is that oftentimes we're not in a position to confirm or deny all these pieces of evidence that make up the theory, right? All the dots. So then we can wrap things up with just a few concluding remarks about these readings and this kind of debate in philosophy. Which again, lots of you can throw a rock. You can't throw a rock these days, it seems like, without hitting a conspiracy theory. So again, an issue that is of relevance to us that I think philosophy has something to say about and something to add to that conversation. And to help us sort through when we should and shouldn't believe a conspiracy theory. So just to wrap things up here, conceptual or philosophical table setting, how we define terms is important, I think, but attempting to settle the issue of what people as if really mean when they call something a conspiracy theory, as if all of us have a single coherent unified idea that we're all referring to, is likely to only get us so far, right? We're going to have to pay attention to some particulars here. On the minimalist definition of a conspiracy theory, clearly there are some true conspiracies, and most of us believe some conspiracy theories, right? Again, on that minimalist definition. On the other hand, some of these conspiracy theories seem to fit the propaganda definition, by which I mean the formulation of the theory itself kind of has obvious propaganda or fallacies in it. So again, those sorts of conspiracy theories, what Kassam called conspiracy theories with a capital T and a capital C and capital T, they look like they're unlikely by definition or by design, right? Nevertheless, we shouldn't prejudge. One of the big lessons here is not just with conspiracy theories, but with any theory. Don't prejudge it without reason, right? That would be epistemically vicious. We also shouldn't accept a conspiracy theory without good reason or any belief without good reason. Also, potentially epistemically vicious. So we need to ask ourselves, is the theory formulated in a non-fallacious, logically consistent manner? Does the theory or evidence for it contain factual errors? We need to, again, are all the empirical claims true, and are all the logical claims that make up this theory or conspiracy narrative, are those claims, did those factual claims actually occur the way the theory says? And do the inferences that connect all the dots and lead to the conclusion that it was a conspiracy theory is the best explanation, are there any fallacies in there? And so we need to ask ourselves, what's the best argument that we should all be wearing tinfoil hats, right? So there's a little bit of an introduction to philosophy and conspiracy theories. I hope you enjoyed this unit. I think it's a pretty fun one to cover. Hope you got something out of it. And hope you got something out of it, and hope you enjoy the next one too.